We are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at today's webinar, which is about DBT and Count, how to bring clarity to model mayhem. I'm Taylor Brownlow. I am head of data at Count. And we've got Chris Hloros here.
Hello.
And we've got a really, really great session. I'm really excited. Chris is someone I've spoken to just kind of one-on-one and in small groups for a while, and she's got some really, really great stuff to share. And I'm really excited to get to that. I thought first, though, I'd give a bit of context about Count. If any of you are new to it, it will be featured quite a bit in the next 45 minutes, so it's probably worth doing a quick intro to that. So I'll just briefly go through that. It asked me so many questions. Oh, so yeah, basically, Count is the first whiteboard built for data. The reason it exists is we saw a lot of data tools are really great for building dashboards or even building queries, but there wasn't anything there to help you really dig into the messy problems that we have to deal with. So one of the things we like to say is nobody can solve churn with a dashboard. So it kind of gives you context of the types of problems that we want the Count canvas to be able to solve. And just to kind of give you an idea of how it works, we've got a SQL query here. It's connected to our database. This is kind of the complexity you might see in a DBT model, or maybe a piece of ad hoc analysis, this kind of thing. And what we can do in the canvas like this is we can explode this query out. And so all those CTEs are now represented as a DAG of queries. So this is kind of what we mean in terms of being able to make really complex things seem a lot simpler. Now, what that means kind of practically, Count really sits best or is at its best when it sits in this really kind of a modern data stack as you would expect. So it sits on top of your database. So that query that we just had is running directly in BigQuery. It connects to DBT, which obviously a lot of today we're going to be going through what that means. But a lot of times Count works side by side with a traditional BI tool where you do your KPI reporting and self-service and all these other activities that BI tools are really not great at. So storytelling, working with stakeholders in a really kind of linked way, problem solving, all this kind of stuff is really where the Count canvas shines. Just to kind of show you a few more examples really quickly. So, things like metric trees where you can help tell really great stories in a way that's better than a dashboard. Complex explorations and deep dives like an investigation where you can really dig into the numbers here, add comments, work together on things. And of course, data modeling, which we're going to get into, obviously, in the next little bit. So in this case, we're looking at, an output of an exposure that we might have. And this exposure is defined in DBT by these different models. And we've brought those models in, they're running live on the database. And we've got little checks in here. And it's really a way to bring loads of transparency to your model. So this would all be hidden behind a script. In DBT, be able to look at them one at a time. It makes it really tough to actually figure out, one, what's going on, especially if you didn't write it, and two, maybe if something's, how to fix it, how to iterate it, what you should do about it, that kind of stuff. So as a super quick intro, like I said, I just wanted to give you guys enough context to know what was coming up. So no further ado, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you if you'd like to give everyone a quick intro to yourself.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining today. Super, super excited. I've told Taylor this Count is my favorite tool in the modern data stack. I promise they are not paying me to say that. I just absolutely love it. So I am the manager head of analytics at Trainual. We are a post-Series B startup that is a software platform all about how to train, scale, onboard teams targeting small businesses. So as you can imagine, there's lots of data. We're a very data-hungry organization, and the analytics team works with everyone from marketing to sales to product to leadership to CX to basically unlock ideas, insights, so that we can take action and move quickly. We are definitely all about making ideas happen and moving so we can create a better product for our customers and have a better process for them overall. We are a small analytics team, and we do have two parts to our data team. So analytics, myself, sits under finance and accounting, and we work really closely with stakeholders one-on-one. We have a team of 3 analysts that are doing all of that. We're very involved with DBT, But we also have partners in that on the engineering side. So on our engineering, we have a squad that does platform and data. And so we're kind of like a hybrid team. We call ourselves the extended data team. We meet regularly and they help us with data pipelines, um, managing ingestion, tests, the quality of things, all of that. And we co-own DBT together. So they're doing modeling, we're doing modeling, all to help us get more reliable data. So that is how we're set up. Other parts of our stack, it's kind of funny. I've been with Trainual for 2 years now. And when I started, we did not have a data warehouse. We did not have a BI tool. We definitely did not have DBT. And now we have BigQuery for our data warehouse. We use Fivetran for ingestion. We have DBT. We have Count clearly and SciSense for our BI tools. And we even have reverse ETL with high touch. And now we're looking into more data visibility tools with data fold and elementary and all kinds of stuff. So we moved very quickly from kind of no data stack to the modern data stack pretty full. And that was a little bit of a challenge because we were all learning on the fly around it. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. So our journey with DBT in particular and data modeling has been about a year, with the last 6 months being a really, really close focus time of how do we get this up and how do we get reliable data so that all of those stakeholders can actually make decisions and trust the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, you guys have definitely progressed a lot in the time that we've known each other. So, yes, I think you've developed, and now you're wiser for it, basically, going through that.
Yes. Wiser and a little hardened. But okay. Yeah, and we really found Count, probably, I guess it's been around the same time we were starting to look at DBT, but originally it was one of our my colleagues, one of our analysts who had seen it at another organization and was asking what SQL IDs we used, and we didn't really use any. We just did everything in BigQuery. So she asked, "Hey, there's this amazing tool called Count. I'd love to use it as my IDE, but it can also do all these other things." And we looked at it and said, "Absolutely." So it was an interesting introduction to Count because it was all about bringing it in as a SQL IDE, but quickly discovered it was so much more than a SQL IDE and adopted it. Adopted it for a lot of ad hoc analysis and things like that. And then wish we had realized sooner how much it could have helped with our modeling, but we're getting there now, and I know we're going to talk through that.
Yeah, yeah, I think we should, yeah, dive into it. I mean, I think a lot of the story that you told me kind of started like a year ago, right?
Yes.
And you had kind of just started with DBT,
Yeah.
and what was going on then?
So we, the state of the business at the time was, right, we had scaled up a bunch. We had made this big investment in our pipeline and our warehouse, and yet we were still having a lot of data outages. We were having unreliable data. We were having constant errors and issues. And so it was kind of like all of the modern data stack things weren't working for us yet. DBT was brought in to help us say, okay, this is going to get us, especially to like reliability tests and one source of truth. That was the main thing. And to hopefully speed things up because we were reusing like the same queries over and over and over again. But didn't really have a good way to do that. We were using scheduled queries in BigQuery, which not a lot of visibility into. Each of us would build our own. So when we first brought in DBT, it was like, great, this is going to solve everything. And our approach was just throw everything in DBT and we'll figure it out. I do not recommend that as an
Went
approach.
well, yeah, and end of session,
Everything worked
job
out
done,
great.
yeah.
But we didn't quite know at that time how to leverage DBT. It was like, oh, this is modeling, so we'll do the exact same thing we've been doing in BigQuery or in our SQL ID, just on our own, and just throw it into BigQuery or into DBT. And so it created probably more issues than help in the beginning. we were having a lot of frustration between the analytics side and the data engineer side because we hadn't really normed on how we wanted it set up. We hadn't talked about or collaborated on what are some of like the core models we want to reuse over and over again. We changed definitions on the regular. Sometimes we would change model names and no one knew that it would then break something downstream. And there was a bit of tension, especially with the analytics team, because we'd build this model in dbt and push it for a PR. And we'd have stakeholders waiting, right? Because it was like, we can't visualize until this model goes through. And we have committed to stakeholders, hey, yeah, we'll get you your visual by this time point. We think we're done and ready to visualize. And then it would be nonstop, comments. And we need to change this, and we need to do this. And why are we doing it this way? And why aren't we reusing this? And we were missing deadlines with our stakeholders. So it was creating tension within the business, and we weren't getting the benefits. We particularly saw this. We were trying to establish this one North Star metric, and I had picked it up and was running with it. It was very complicated. I had spent probably 6 months working on it, trying to get it there. Every time I'd push a PR, there'd be more comments. It would take more long. And I finally thought we got it. And then I looked at the data and some of the tests at the very, very end, and it didn't work. And so I don't even know how many models. I think there were 20 models in that I was just like, well, none of these work. And I had to go an entirely different approach to get something that worked. And all of those hours and hours, I don't even know how many hours, 100 plus hours, just wasted.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was sort of like, why are we doing dbt? This is not helping. What's going on here? And it was kind of this crux of, are we going to stick with it? Or are we going to just say, no, like this isn't working for us? Because it was painful.
Yeah, you got to almost like the perfect storm of
yes,
it's really not working for anyone at that point when it's causing you guys more effort to get these models out, and the business is increasingly frustrated. Trust is eroding. You have even less time now because you have can't really explain why you should be doing this work in the first place.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. So you took a different approach next, right? So you kind of like
yes.
Sorry, telling your story. Go ahead.
You know it very well. Yeah. So at that point, we had another really big complex model that was the only way we were going to be able to do it is getting it into dbt because of all of the complexity, all of the building. It was a financial model too. So we needed ultimate transparency on it. It was an accounting model. This is something that's going to be audited, right? And we had been trying to do it in Word documents and Excel sheets and just SQL, just in BigQuery itself. It was not working. So we knew we had to try again. And where we were getting to was we were ready to try something different, right? We were not going to go through what I went through with my big key metric in 6 months and try it for 6 months later. We had already struggled. So what we realized at that point was we needed more transparency. We decided to do sort of a hackathon kind of event on this model and say, okay, we've got this big problem, big model. We've tried tackling it one off. Let's bring the whole team together around it and see what we can do. Let's give it a week, really focus on it. But we knew if we all just went off and started building in dbt, right, it probably wasn't going to work. So we had to try something entirely different. The other really important piece was we knew that our stakeholder, our accounting team, had to be involved at every step of the way because we just didn't have as much knowledge. Like, I know a bit about deferred revenue and contra revenue, but not to the level that will pass an auditor. So we needed them in there with us, with the data, to show them outputs as we were going to say, does this look right? Is this going to work? Will this give you what you need? And that's not something you can really do of bringing an external stakeholder into dbt or even into BigQuery. So that's where we thought, hey, we need more transparency. We need something that we can interact with stakeholders with. We need visibility. We need something where we can collaborate all together in one place and see what the other analysts are doing. Let's try throwing this in Count. Because we've been using the canvas a bit more. So let's try throwing this in Count and have everything that we need for this model in one place. So it was totally a new approach. We did not know if it was going to work. And what we found was that it changed how we did modeling. So I think there are a couple parts of this. The first was it helped us realize that with DBT and with modeling, it's really easy. You want to get to the endpoint, but you need to allow for a lot more experimentation. I had worked in consulting before and had done some projects with design thinking and design theory around the ideas of divergence and convergence. And that was something we needed to bring into this process because we still weren't sure how we were going to build this model. And so we gave space for ourselves to diverge, to say, here's the problem. Here's the outcome we know we need to get to, but we need space to explore and to discover and to say, nope, that didn't work, move on, but in a really, really transparent way. So the learnings were passed through the team. So that was one thing, just a little bit of a change of giving us more room for divergence and then converging, using the canvas to then note when it's like, okay, we tried a bunch of things. This is working. Let's mark that. This is a good one. Now we can move on to the next piece and we can build on that. So we knew what was reliable to build on while we were building. So if we're good, I'm going to share our canvas.
Yeah? Yes. Okay. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Super exciting. I know. Okay. Yeah, Hopin wants to make sure you know what you're sharing.
I know they ask you like 4 questions when you do it. Yeah.
They do. Okay. Did I answer all the questions, Hopin? I did. There we go. Okay. So this is our canvas. I know it looks maybe a little intimidating at first, but what it really did is it broke it down into pieces. So on this left-hand side here, all of these, and we'll scroll into some of them, this was everything when we were working through. And it allowed us to set things up. And you can see the color coding even from like that 5,000 foot view. We use that color coding to help us navigate through it as we were building this model. So a couple key things that really helped us. At the top, all of this information right here was reference material. It was everything we'd tried before. It was links to all of our Google documents you can see, to Looms, to documentation from the source that we were using. We brought in DAGs. This was our source DAG. Before we even were building DBT models, we were bringing in our source DAG so we knew what they looked like. And then we had a lot of different notes that we needed to keep about some of the complexities we were dealing with because this was all accounting. So that housed all of our knowledge and we kept building on it when we would learn something new. Sometimes we would add a post-it note like you see here. Sometimes we'd add a text block, all the above. Then this is the setup, and this is really important because this helps with that divergence and convergence. And it also makes sure you don't get stopped along the way. We had 3 different sections here. One were open questions. So when we were modeling and we got a question for our stakeholder, instead of like getting out of flow, if it was something that was just like, we're not really sure on this, but we can keep going, we would just drop a post-it note in here, this lovely blocks. You can see here are the questions, and then would put a comment in and say, hey, can you answer this to our stakeholder? And they were able to come in and provide answers. And then we would note with green once they'd been answered and we were ready to go. So we had a place, a parking lot for questions that came up for stakeholders. We had a place for edge cases because we knew that in this, we were going to have some that weren't going to work so well. So instead of like going down that rabbit hole of like needing to figure it out, we would just say, oh, edge case, push it here. And then again, this was something that we would have meetings with our stakeholders about of how do we want to handle these? So again, didn't slow us down. And then the third We call them glow ups. I think coming from other TV shows about glow ups. But this was when it was ideas for models that we had or ways we were building it that would be like, we don't need this for V1, but this might be really interesting for V2. So we were already iterating even while we were building our vase. So we have those that we could then come back to later once our models were ready to say, hey, do we want to enhance them a bit more? So that was our enhancement. So we had our questions, our edge cases, and our enhancements.
Almost like yeah, like those three are like the things that could distract you, right? And then the
Exactly.
top section is just the things you need to know, but you only
Yep.
need to know them when you need to know them. So
Yeah.
quickly find
Or when
them.
you need to refer back to them
Yes.
because it's like, hey, what were we doing with that? The other thing that we did this time was to make sure everyone was on the same page when we started was we had sort of daily summaries. And that's what these boxes were, where we would say, okay, at the start of this week, here's where we were. We tried this, this didn't work. Here's the da. So this is our proposed approach. So everyone was on the same page of how we were going to approach it. And we were able to then divide up our work too. And we did some flow charts for things of, in particular, how we were going to take one big table and say, we need to model out a lot of different examples and edge cases and specific different situations. This allowed us to visually see the situations, and each of these red blocks became a model. So it was a visual representation of how we needed to split up the data and build different, these would be int models, if you really think about it in DBT language, in a super visual way before we actually started going into it. And at the end of the day, we would like post a loom and say, here's where we got to, and that would be the start of the next day.
Yeah,
So,
that's to be
yeah,
like one of my favorite things. I mean, the rest of campus is amazing as well, but
yeah,
that the idea of because you could always send an email with that kind of stuff and just to have that communication, but it's because that screenshot of that diagram is relating to the work in the rest of the canvas, having that there in the same place
yeah,
is so helpful just to come back and be like, yeah, no, this is what we talked about last week or last month, or when you move forward and you have to do the next iteration on this model, you're like, this is why we made this decision and it's here, not lost in an email somewhere. It's kind of all part of this kind of aggregation of knowledge that you're building around this
absolutely.
model here.
Yeah.
But
So that feels like a lot of setup if you're like, wait, I thought this was about DBT modeling. What we learned is to do the best job, especially for something this complex, right? This was one we had tried for months, we couldn't do it. This really helped us have a setup and have a plan each day. Now, the plan did include discovery. So this green thing over here was our sandbox where we could just like play and look at some of the data and whatnot. But we also know, and each of the analysts had their own sandbox. We also know that, like, as another analyst in there, there's nothing in here that's going to be reliable. This is just where the analyst is sort of digging in and looking at things. And that's really great when you're working with another analyst to know, I don't want to use any of this. This is their scratch pad, right? Because how many times, at least me in past, I've worked with another analyst on like a model and it's really hard to know. And I've built something on top of something where they're like, oh no, that wasn't the final, right? And then you're back to the starting point again. So we were able to launch where our scratch pads were. And then each of us would take, we used frames. So in Canvas, a frame kind of connects multiple SQL cells. It includes your comments, all of that stuff together in sort of one topic area. We use these for each model that we knew we were going to have to do in DBT. So each of these red boxes became a frame and we'd start working on them and we'd divide them up between the team and they would be red when we were working on them. And then once we were like, yep, they're good to go, we've checked this, and we're ready, it would go to purple. So since we're at the end of our processes now, we have a lot of purple. That should tell you that this was successful.
satisfying to see, I'm sure.
Yes, that's really good. And you can notice we added little icons for DBT of when we got to like, this will be the model that goes into DBT, or at least what we thought would be at like, this is an endpoint. Now let's figure out how it goes into DBT. We knew what all of our endpoints were that would then go into DBT. And we had all the background and the understanding of how we got there. So it ended up with this lovely one right at the end that took all of these together. So essentially, these are almost like CTs, or each one was its own int model before we got to our final down here, which was this big collaboration that we could then show our stakeholder and say, okay, we've got something now. It's working. Where do we go from here? And it was like, we're ready to test and we're ready to do that. So we were super excited. Within a week, we got like 80% of the way done on this super complex model in a week. And we had been working on it on and off, on and off, and on and off for probably 6 months with like no progress. So
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah,
yeah,
you look at it like that.
yeah. And we felt like at the end, not only did we make progress, but we knew how we were going to now turn it from something that was very ad hoc in a canvas into something to productionize. We knew which pieces were the ones we now need to get into DBT because they're the working pieces. So we're not going to have extraneous models. And this is actually where there's a little bit of that divergence again, because you have your end pieces now. Now you can be more thoughtful about, okay, how do we structure that best for DBT? Like, do we want each of these to be an int model? Are there any of those we could combine together potentially? Is there anything else we need to do? Should any of this be added to other models? It's really great because you've sort of done the divergence and the convergence around getting the model and the outcome. You have what your endpoints need to be. Now you have those flagged and can think a little again about, how do we best get this into DBT at this point so that your end result is clean and reusable and what you need it to be, as opposed to just throwing everything in there and hoping.
I think, yeah, I was kind of gonna summarize basically this, where you've gotten to, like,
Yeah.
up till now, basically, just from watching it. I mean, it sounds like this model you spent, was it 6 months kind of trying to tackle this? It was again
Probably
that
more.
just
I'm
more.
saying 6 months because if we knew the actual time, it would be even harder to swallow.
And multiply that by all the people that have been working on it, and then yeah, that's really not good to think about the amount of time then. And yeah, but you also had this, like, you really needed it to work. I think it's also like, it feels like a lot of this, experiment, as we've been calling it, like this canvas was, it almost had to work. Like this was like DBT's last test to be
Yeah.
like, are we going to move forward with this, or are we better what we were doing before?
Yeah.
And so kind of coming in to the canvas just allowed you this space to, one, work with the stakeholders. As you say, this was a model that was so complex about a subject matter that, unless you've been in finance, I don't think anyone in data knows the intricacies of finance unless you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
It's one of the more complex kind of business units to work with, I would say, especially in something as kind of critical as,
auditing. Yeah, this
exactly.
is our monthly reckoning mission where we are going to be audited, and if we fail our audit, like,
yeah,
that can't happen. This isn't just a nice to have. This is a need to have. I think the other piece was, this was our last, not only for DBT, like our last thing, but if we weren't able to figure it out this time, we were going to have to find an external solution for this, because you can't just not do it. And that external solution was going to be a significant investment, like 6-figure kind of significant investment per year for our company. And when you're a small startup, that's a lot. So we wanted to give it at least one more try and say, if we try something different, if we bring everybody together, if we have the collaboration, if we can pull the stakeholders in, if we don't lose momentum, can we actually do this before we sign up for something that's going to have that much of an impact on our costs as a business?
Yeah. And so I think, yeah, that it totally feels like the right thing to just take a very, like, scale up or startup approach and say, okay, well, let's all swarm around this and try something very new, a different way of working for all of us. But we have to make this work. So let's try this, and let's try, you tried a bunch of different, there's so many new things on here that you guys weren't doing before at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think which is great, like really why I wanted to have you on and share this with everyone else, is like most places you don't get the chance to just go have a week and be like, just try 12 new things with stakeholders on a really critical piece of work. And
Yeah.
then we can see what we like and what we're going to keep and what we don't keep. So I think, like, yeah, hearing from all this, then going back through it feels like the really valuable step of saying, like, okay, we tried, yeah, I'm making up a number. We tried, 5 new things here.
Yeah.
What are we going to keep? What are we going to, how are we going to keep this momentum going forward? And what have we learned?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll stop sharing just because I know it's beautiful and it can it can distract you away. I think the biggest difference now in the stuff that we've kept is a couple of the things. One, and this is one of the biggest ones, is that idea of divergence and convergence is making time for spikes. So that's what we call them. So we noticed that on the engineering side, that when there was a new feature request or anything, they'd be like, hey, we'll do a spike around this to figure out how much time it's going to take. And we realized when we had done this big complicated model, some of that was what was happening, right? In our scratch pads or in the things that didn't work. So we are now making more time for spikes whenever we start something big. Now, if it's like a one-off ad hoc, hey, can you pull this data for me? We're not saying we're doing this like every single time we get a request, but where it's a big model and we don't know if it's going to work and it's something that we need to reuse over and over again, we'll do a spike and say, hey, we're not sure if we can get this and we're not sure the best way to get this. So we'll block an hour. We do some sort of time bound around it, an hour, 2 hours. We'll spike on it, see what we can, and then we'll come back to you with an answer. So rather than just going down into the model land, we use that experimentation and the discovery time for something. And the great thing I think about the canvas too, which is something you don't get to keep if you're just modeling in dbt, it's there in the GitHub, version control stuff, but it's really easy to quickly show, here's a spike and the pink cells, we just use the red cells meant tried this, didn't work. And then we add notes of why it didn't work. And so for documentation purposes, the canvas helps us, even when we're doing our spikes, know what we explored and what didn't work and keep that there so that the next analyst doesn't try that again. Or it tells us what we need to maybe change in the data. And then it's easier to go to our engineering team and say, hey, we have this request from a stakeholder. Here's what we've tried. We can even share the canvas with them. Say, here's how we tried to get it. It's not working. So we need to actually change the way the data is ingested, or we need to change something in our code so we can get that data. It's much easier then to ask for that kind of engineering change when your engineering team is already so busy, right? It shows them, we looked into it. Here's all the things we looked into. Here's why it's not working. Can we get this in the queue? So,
and you could recruit the original kind of stakeholder requester, if they were the ones originally asking for it, saying, okay, you told me this is really important. Here's why we can't do it right now. Help me help me help you
prioritize this with
Yeah.
the engineering team. And then we can have a really good conversation about prioritizing. Okay, someone wants to see the flow chart close up. I am happy to do this. I do love the flow charts in Count. Now, these are just super easy. They are just boxes with arrows, just so we're clear. Nothing fancy. You don't have to learn any special tools. If you can do it in any other place, you can do it in Count. But so yeah, these were just very simple. Like this was again for our finance model of an invoice was created. Does it have this? Yes or no? No, that meant that was going to be its own model. Yes. Does it have this? Yes or no? No, that mean it was another model. Did it have this? Yes or no? No, then it was going to be another model. It was helping us break down because we found what our starting point was, and then this helped us break down. But close up there of what it looked like. And then we could even add in some calculations that we were doing and some new additions. You can see we would just drop a post-it and be like, actually, we have this thing that it's, this was added on. So that wasn't there to start. That actually came into being and we added on to the flow chart as we went.
And yeah, these became your business definitions, right?
They became our business definitions. Yeah. Yeah. And we now have a model that just flags those different things that goes in DBT. That's what this model over here does. So yeah,
Cool.
that there's a little close up on the flowcharts. They work great. Big fan of having a flowchart with your SQL, with your post-it notes, with your Loom videos, all in one place. It's just
never have too many.
No, never have too many. Oh, so that is one thing, was the spikes. That definitely changed. We're using that now. We do use the documentation functionality. There's another question about documentation functionality. We do that in DBT. This helps us with our documentation. Documentation goes way faster because we know a lot more about the model and the purpose. And then we maintain the count canvas as well. We're still figuring out how we do all of our documentation. One thing we're going to be experimenting is maybe adding in some of our count canvases to our GitHub, to our pull requests, to say, hey, here's the canvas that links back to it, so we can get back to it if we want to. But we do the DBT documentation, absolutely. This helps us determine some of the documentation that we need. And in the documentation can tell us like why we decided to do this, or some of these edge cases. We'll take those post-it notes and those become some of our descriptions of, we're doing this because of this edge case. So it actually makes documentation go faster, which is great.
And as you say, I mean, there's the purpose of documentation, DBT model, there's so many things. I think DBT documentation is good for, other AEs kind of coming in and trying to figure out what happened, but there's all this other context that you can put in the canvas around why did we do that? Remember, we had two versions we were playing with.
Yeah.
Like, why did we choose this one and not this one? Like, kind of all that extra stuff there. It almost makes sense to have, depending on the complexity of what you're looking at.
Yeah. Hey, we haven't even thought about this, but we could, at least the top level of a model description for something this complex, when we get this all done, I could absolutely see cleaning up the canvas and dropping that into the DBT documentation. Like, here's a link to the canvas if you want all the context and all the Loom videos and all the spreadsheets behind it too. And then it lives right in there if you want it.
One day, hopefully they'll be embedded directly.
Embedded directly. That's the hope. That is definitely the hope. So, yeah. Do you want to talk about more things that are different?
Yeah. I was trying to think of the kind of, maybe on that track of pulling up old things again.
Yes.
Like when you're pulling up existing things, it feels like it's related a bit to documentation and trying to figure out, especially if someone else wrote it, like trying to make sense of existing models.
Yeah. So because that worked really well, so we have reused that process one way or another. Sometimes it's like not as blown out as that. Sometimes it's smaller. But the other thing we've started doing is using count to help us document, to Taylor's point, models that were built before. And so I'm just going to share another screen. So again, this is all about like not theory. This is stuff that's really, really happening and how we're doing it. I cannot take credit for this one. But we had an attribution model that was built by an analyst who ended up taking another opportunity. Attribution is not easy, and we would try and update it, but then it would take us like, sometimes we'd be like, oh, that's a quick update. We can do that like in an hour and an hour. And we were noticing in our sprints that instead it would be like, oh, that ended up taking 2 days to update because I tried to update it, but I didn't realize all the things that were connected and everything. So when we had a little time, one of our analysts was like, this will end up saving me time. We have now, and this is something fun feature, I know they're doing a lot more, Count does integrate with DBT. So if you, I can't scroll in on the side, but there's a little DBT thing here. So if you pull in your data models, you can pull it in and blow it out, basically. And so this came directly from DBT. We didn't have to enter any of these cells into Count. You go over and you have this great little button. Find one of the ones. We have see this lovely little thing, and you just click that. You can see all the metadata, and you can also just pull it into your canvas and it'll split out, and you can say, do I want everything, all the dependent cells or not? So our analyst did that, pulled it in, this is where all of that came from, was that integration with DBT, and then went through and started documenting. So you can see all the work they did to try and understand what was going on, adding in notes, different colors, this and that, so that by the end, we got to these great little canvases and reports that go into detail of how we got everything. So it started there, and this actually, you can view it in a report mode, just in case you didn't know that. So she's now set it up as a report where we can go in, and it is now all documented here. So all the context, and we had this documented in DBT, great point. Like, we had the fields documented, we didn't understand how we got there. So we're now using Count to help us better understand models that we had built before. And find places where we can iterate and make them better. When we were doing this, we found a piece, because this was in the days of just throw everything into DBT. We found a place where there was a piece that we were reusing, and we were using like the end model, which was really complicated, and it was slowing things down because this is a really tough model. And we're like, that needs to be its own thing. And then we can just reuse that piece over and over. It'll reduce some of our querying time. It'll do all of this stuff. So it totally helped us there identify ways that if you have Mayhem already in DBT, which we definitely do, ways to simplify it and to pull pieces out and to make your instance better, not just start from scratch and make it clean when it's going in. So that was a big win for us too. And yeah, now we have it all documented and more. I know we love the flow charts. More.
I was gonna say we can't
yeah,
leave on the flow charts here. Yeah.
Understand how we get attribution. So this is basically how we attribute a new trial that comes in. What do we attribute it? This is just the visual of that. I don't remember how many models are in this. It's a lot. It's a lot, but it's all then done in one visual. All of that SQL, all of those models, all of the DAGs turn down to this, which is much easier to understand for a stakeholder. So if our stakeholders ask, we can actually just give them this image.
I think one of the things that when we talked about this before, we got this question beforehand that was about, I want to learn how to optimize my DBT models. And I think what I hear a lot of in that space is kind of how to build them really fast, or how to reduce time between approval, and like, how do you test this so it doesn't go wrong, and this kind of stuff. I think what's nice about like this example and some of the other ones that you've told me about is it's in all the other steps, right? It's not necessarily about the part where you're deploying a model or testing a model or anything like that. It's in like, are you building the right model? Because that's where you're going to save the most time. Is you've just built a new model you didn't need to build, so that's loads of time saved. Or you worked with the stakeholder to like in your spikes to figure out what is the thing that we really need here before we go off and do it. I think that's really, to me, it feels like where you've gotten the most kind of gains from this. Right?
Yeah. And the other thing is not building a model in DBT when you said that you don't need to. Sometimes in startups or just as an analyst, you're going to do ad hoc requests, right? And in our previous thing of like throw everything into DBT because that was the only place we had any transparency, right? BigQuery, just building things in BigQuery, you'd have to do scheduled queries. Like you couldn't build on top of things to begin with. And again, no transparency at all. So we were kind of stuck of throwing all this stuff in DBT that would then, I don't know, a week later, 2 weeks later, the stakeholder doesn't need anymore. Like it was an experiment, it was an A/B test, it was any of those things. So that's the other place that's helping us with our Mayhem, is not putting in things that don't need to be. So this is an example. We now will just use Count for things where we need to do some complicated modeling. So you can see at the top here, there's some complicated modeling going on. Right? But this was an experiment. If it had worked, we would have then taken this and distilled it down and figured out what we needed to then put in DBT. But this was an experiment that we ended up pivoting away from. We were able to do that because we had it in the Count canvas. We were able to create all of these visuals, tell a story to our stakeholders of what was happening. And they were like, yep, nope, that's not delivering what we want. And now I don't have to go back and delete a model in DBT out. And remembering to do that, maybe other people are better. Like, I want to have more time for maintenance. I really do, but I don't. And so this now means my DBT instance is cleaner because I didn't put in something that is no longer valid, that I had to remember to pull out, and an analyst isn't going to go use it because it's in DBT. And I trust if it's in DBT, it's ready to go. It's productionized, right? So now we treat DBT very much, it's production, and things in there you can use. We use count for things when we're experimenting, ad hoc, getting ready. And then if we decide, yeah, we need this productionized, we are at like step 4 already. And it's much easier to then get in what we need in DBT. And again, go through how should we design it for DBT, and work that way.
Yeah, I've heard someone else say it as it makes your other tools better because you're using them the way they're meant to be used.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, cool. We're running out of time somehow. So there's been so many things in here that hopefully people have been making note of that they can take away. But I was wondering if there were, let's say, 2 things that somebody is sitting there kind of feeling this model mayhem. What are 2 things that they should maybe try tomorrow besides go get count? I mean, sure, but maybe more kind of process or like mindset kind of thing. Yeah.
So my best piece of advice is to first make sure when you start, you have a clear starting point and a clear ending point. Build those out before you build any model. And the starting point should include the context, what you've tried before, whatever you can, just get it down so you know that. It could also mean looking at your DBT instance to say what you already have. Get a clear starting point, get a clear ending point of this is what I need to deliver for the stakeholder to answer this question, etc. So that would be step 1. Have a clear start, have a clear end. The other thing I'd recommend is give yourself space for discovery in the middle. So instead of trying to make the data fit a model structure of, this, go into, discover the data and figure out what is the best way to build your models based on the data, not the other way around. We tried so hard to fit data into a model structure versus saying, let's figure out what model structure works for the way our data is. So give yourself that discovery and let the data guide the models, not the other way around.
Yeah, I like that. I think I definitely get caught in that
Right.
myself.
I need to count this as an it model. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe it's something else. I do it all the time.
Try hard enough.
I know. If I try hard enough, I can make it work. And don't be afraid to iterate, right? Like I've done that before. I've built an int model and then later realized like, oh, that's a fact model. Like that's something we need to reuse. Don't be afraid to iterate. That's part of this too. And it's how you optimize is understanding you're going to learn things or there are going to be new needs that pop up. And so iterate.
100%. Yeah, that's one of those lessons kind of I wish I had learned sooner for sure.
Right. You think you're just done. Yeah. Just don't over iterate so you do nothing but modeling. Like again, there should always be purpose.
Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to, I don't know if you've seen this preview either, so
I don't think I have. I'm very excited. That's why I joined, was to see this preview.
Just to get a preview at the end. Yes. Well, some of you guys who maybe using Count like Chris already know that we do have a DBT Cloud integration already, but we've been working for the last couple of months on a DBT Core integration as well as some changes to DBT Cloud. These are going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, so I wanted to give you all a live demo in the dev environment. We'll see how it goes. It's always a bit of a risk jumping into the dev environment, so I hope you feel all the tension there. No, it'll be great. So let me jump into this. So here we have this canvas here is connected to DBT Core. Again, you can see this DBT logo is the same that Chris was pointing out. You can still jump in and add your models to the canvas as a single one-off like this, or all the dependencies like you could before. Now Tim's question, one of the big changes that's coming to dbt core and cloud is much more support for Jinja and macros. So you can see in here now, you can bring in all your Jinja helpers, all this. You pretty much have complete support for anything dbt can do in Jinja. With macros, we can do that as well. And you can see it in here and reference it in any of your code cells as you want. So that would be nice if you're making use of a lot of macros in a lot of different places. You can just pull that in and be able to kind of edit that and look at that as you would as you're developing the rest of your models. The other thing you notice is, Chris, we borrowed your idea of putting little dbt images on things. So now you can see these cells are actually connected to dbt, which is different. So you have this little dbt option here. And again, this is for core. And the last thing, which I think kind of fits into, Tim, your question on documentation, is, when you have a frame like this, and this refers to a, exposure as a customer's model, we could before have right-clicked and said, copy the SQL, and we would have put this in dbt cloud. Or for core, we would have put that into a PR. Now we can commit to GitHub directly from the canvas. So I can take this cell here and say commit to GitHub, and we've worked out which models have changed, which files in our dbt core GitHub have actually changed. We can see the diff in here as well, which is super nice. We can add messages, and we can see we can actually open a pull request for this. And what you'll see is each of these modifications is linked to the part of the canvas where it happened. So we can point to which frame all these changes took place in, and that can link directly to the canvas there. So that is a super, super quick intro. Again, I won't go over some of the existing functionality that's already there, but that is what the big changes are. Any questions on that?
I'm very excited. I'm just going to say, because we use macros a lot now. It helps with some of the transparency, especially for things that are constantly changing in our business. So we leverage macros a lot, and so I cannot wait. That's gonna help us even more as we're building our models out.
Yeah, I'm super excited about the macros, and Jinja in general is just something I've really enjoyed adding to my workflow. So like just to avoid the, I'll go into Python if I have to, but it's very nice to just use some Jinja to avoid that.
Same.
Well, I think that's running down to the end. If there are any other questions, comments, feel free to drop us a line. So I'm flying behind in my banner switching. If you have anything else for myself or for Chris, please do. We'll stick around for a few minutes, but thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Chris. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing your canvases.
Yes, I know. It was felt very vulnerable. And I will say I did clean them up to make them look a little nicer at the end.
Not much though.
Not much. That is the one nice thing too, is you can go back and do a little documentation after the fact or at the end of the day, and clean things up as you go. It's actually a really good practice and reminder for me. So if I have to put something down and come back, I always try and clean up a little.
Yes, that was good. And yes, keep an eye out in the next couple of weeks for these changes to dbt. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.